One of the things I love about Batman is how this same character can be adapted to film in so many different ways. Since the 1940s, people have watched Batman on screen, and pretty much ever since, he has been a character that symbolizes that era of popular culture in a way that no other superhero does. And this is something that makes ranking the movies so fun, but also difficult, because these movies are so different from each other in almost every way, from how their characters are written and portrayed, the themes they explore, right through to the style of filmmaking being used. But somehow it's all still Batman. But before we jump into the ranking, let me make 4 quick disclaimers about this video. Number 1, this is of course just my opinion, and I'm looking forward to hearing your rankings in the comments below. Number 2, while I will be ranking the films best to worst, I will also be placing them into 4 broad categories of quality, ranging from the red tier at the bottom to the blue or god tier at the top. And I have done this to indicate what I think the general quality of the film is, which in many ways is more important than the numerical ranking. I'll get to the tier definitions when I get to the ranking itself, but in general, I could swap the numerical order of the films within each tier and still be pretty happy with the overall ranking. But decisions must be made, sometimes hard ones, so you will be seeing a numbered list of the Batman movies from best to worst. But number 3, I will be excluding the animated Batman movies. And this is partly because there are quite a few animated Batman movies, and while I know only 2 have had wide theatrical releases, I've decided to keep this list focused on the live action features. But in case you're wondering, Lego Batman would be green tier and Mask of the Phantasm would be god tier. While on this point, I'm also not counting Suicide Squad or Joker, because although they both feature Bruce Wayne, he is not a lead character in those movies. But he is a central and arguably the lead character in the 2 versions of the Justice League, so I have included them in the ranking along with BVS, mostly to have an excuse to talk about the Batfleck. Finally, number 4, I will not be giving the Batman a numerical ranking in this video. I have seen it, in IMAX of course, but I have had years to consider all of the other Batman movies and mere days to consider this one, so I think it's too early to give it a definitive ranking right now. But as you'll see at the end of the video, I will be giving it a full review, and I know damn well for sure which of the 4 tiers I would place it in. So stick around for that, or just skip ahead to this time if that's all you care about. But for those of you who are keen to hear my ranking, let's start at the bottom in the red tier, which is the tier reserved for movies that I think are genuinely bad movies that have very few redeeming qualities. And right in at number 11 is Batman and Robin. The only positive thing I really have to say about this movie is that if you are 8 years old, it is the funniest and coolest movie you have ever seen. But the problem with that is that if you are older than 8, then you start to notice that this movie is basically a 2-hour-long toy commercial with a terrible script, wooden acting, and some of the weirdest production design choices in all of Batman. But putting all that to one side, the reason Batman and Robin comes in at the bottom of my list is because this movie was such a misstep that it almost killed off the idea of comic book movies in Hollywood for a generation. A sequel was cancelled, and to this day, Bat Nipples is the harshest judgment that can be laid at the feet of a superhero movie. So all I can say is thank God Sam Raimi saved the genre in 2002. Number 10, and still in the red tier, is the Justice League. Like I said before, I am including the Justice League in the ranking because even though it's not strictly speaking a Batman movie, he is arguably the lead character in those films, so I have decided to give them a ranking. But this one is right down in the red tier. The production issues this film experienced are infamous and well documented, so I won't get into them, but this movie perfectly symbolizes how intense studio interference in a creative work can end up having disastrous consequences for audiences, the film, and the studio itself. Joss Whedon's gutting of the story and his last-ditch attempt to inject MCU-style humor and levity into a universe that actively set out to be the opposite of that makes for an even more depressing watch today than when it came out. Because even though the early films of the DCEU had a mixed reception, you can't deny that Zack Snyder had a distinctive and clear vision of how he wanted to tell this story and build this universe, and that all went out the window with the Justice League. So believe it or not, that's it for the red tier. Those are the only 2 live-action Batman movies I would consider to be truly bad movies. Which brings us to the yellow tier, which I consider to be movies that are flawed but still entertaining or significant in their own way. And coming in at number 9 is Batman v Superman. This is a divisive movie, so this will be a divisive placement, so before we get into why it is here, let me talk about the things I really like about this movie. And the thing I like most is Ben Affleck's Bruce Wayne, especially this opening scene. This was such a great great way to follow on from Man of Steel, and I think it's still possibly the best introduction to a new Batman that we have seen on screen, or at least it was until last week. I liked seeing an older, cynical Bruce Wayne, which I think Affleck plays to perfection. I also love the design of the Batcave, the Batmobile, and Bruce's different suits. I mean, remember when this promo image was released? But ultimately, BVS is let down by a convoluted plot, a cringeworthy villain, too much sequel baiting, and, well, by its characters. I love the Batfleck for the reasons I just said, but I think the high point for his character in this movie was the opening scene. And despite watching him experience this trauma, I don't think Bruce's motivation to counter Superman is articulated clearly enough, nor do I think the moment of reconciliation is particularly convincing. Henry Cavill's Clark Kent has a much more compelling character journey, and I think Zack Snyder was much more interested in telling his story than Bruce Wayne's. Which brings us on to number 8, the Snyder Cut. It goes without saying that what this film represents, the triumph of the fans' campaign to have Snyder's vision restored, is monumental, and is a cautionary tale for studios applying too much creative control over a franchise. But I have placed it in the yellow tier because, well, as a movie it's just a bit too long. I know why it's 4 hours long, I know they wanted to just release everything and present the complete package, and I am glad they did, but this movie will always exist in that context. If we had a more streamlined and theatrical version of Snyder's Justice League, maybe it would rank higher, but as it stands, I find it hard to rewatch, not just because of its length, but also because it's a reminder of all the possibilities that the DCEU had that sadly will probably never come to pass. I am glad though that we'll get to see the Batfleck at least once more in The Flash later this year. I really love him in the role, and it's such a shame that his legacy as the character will be marred by the films he had to appear in. Number 7 is Adam West's 1966 Batman, the movie. Now, some people would place this in the red tier because of the legacy it had on Batman's image and pop culture for generations, and fair enough, but I have placed it here for the simple reason that this film does exactly what it intends to do. This is a kids movie and only a kids movie, and therefore can be forgiven for its cartoonish tone because it is all intentional and squarely targeted at its audience. The opening credits explicitly acknowledge this. Batman 1966 is a very different movie from, say, Batman and Robin, because even though that is also cartoony, it was also a movie that was made for both kids and adults, so it can be judged by how it holds up to watch as an adult. Batman 1966 needs to be judged through the eyes of a child, and by that standard, it does its job, so deserves a place in the yellow tier. So that brings us to the green tier, which means that even though these movies aren't in the top spots, I still think they are excellent Batman movies. Like I said earlier, I could swap around the order of these movies in the ranking and still be pretty happy with it. But this is a ranking video, so rank them I must, and coming in at number 6 is The Dark Knight Rises. It was never going to be easy to follow The Dark Knight, especially without being able to bring Heath Ledger's Joker back, but The Dark Knight Rises deserves a spot on the gold list because it provides a satisfying conclusion to the Nolan trilogy, and delivers a cinematic spectacle in doing so. Yes, it has a convoluted plot, yes, it has a lot of implausible scenes, yes, it's hard to understand anything Bane says, yes, Talia is a pretty underwhelming villain who has the most unintentionally hilarious death scene of all time. But you know what? None of this matters because it still has some of the best ever moments of Batman put to film. The ascent from the pit, Bane's introduction, this fight, Michael Caine's performance, Hans Zimmer's music, and the goddamn cinematography. I mean, every frame of this movie is just beautiful. I can rewatch this movie and be entertained every single time. Could it be better? Of course, but it is still head and shoulders above most other movies of its genre, and it firmly deserves its place on the green list. Number 5, Batman Returns. This was an excellent follow-up to Tim Burton's original Batman. Michael Keaton's Batman is so much more refined in his second outing, but we all know that the real stars of this movie were these two. Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman is iconic, and I think it's fair to say that all of this was pretty influential in the formative years for a lot of people who grew up with this movie. As for Danny DeVito's Penguin, well, he just embodies this role and conveys so much depth and character with his performance. Also, it has a literal penguin army, so of course I'm going to be slightly biased towards this movie. But this was a hard film to rank because I don't think the finished product quite lives up to the quality of all its different parts. The plot drags out at times, the scene where Selina becomes Catwoman is completely bizarre, and Christopher Walken is just kind of a bit boring next to DeVito and Pfeiffer. Plus, I don't think Tim Burton spends anywhere near as much time emphasizing Gotham itself as he did in the first film. Unlike his Reeves' original Batman, Gotham isn't really a character here, it's just kind of there in the background, and I think the film suffers because of it. But despite that, these two performances are more than enough to distract you from the flaws in this story, just like Keaton's charm distracts you from the fact that this Batman movie doesn't really have a whole lot of Batman in it. His character has no growth or clear motivation for this whole movie other than to just stop the bad guys because he's Batman. Selina and Oswald both have much better arcs, and we actually spend more time with them than we do with Bruce. And it's because of them that this movie, despite its flaws, is still a stylistic and entertaining ride, and for that reason it has earned a place on the green tier. Number 4, Batman Begins, and this was a hard decision, but it comes in at number 4 only by a fraction. This movie is almost flawless. In fact, pretty much my only criticisms of it have to do with the fact that this was still fairly early on in Christopher Nolan's filmmaking career, and you can tell he was still refining his style of direction and cinematography. But this movie was and still is the definitive gritty reboot that blasted memories of the Bat-nipples away for good and gave us a grounded, character-oriented origin story for Christian Bale's Batman. Liam Neeson's Ra's al Ghul is a great character, and the training scenes are some of my favourite from any Batman movie. And Cillian Murphy's Scarecrow tends to get overshadowed by the Joker and Bane when people think of the Nolan villains, but I think his performance in this film is really underrated, and I'm glad he returns briefly in the other Dark Knight entries. Don't get me wrong, I love this film and don't begrudge anyone who puts it closer to the top of their list. That's why it sits almost at the top of the green list, but for me it was only just pipped out for the bronze medal position by number 3, Batman. And the reason I put this movie above Batman Begins is simple. This movie is what made modern Batman. Without this, there would be no animated series, no Batman Beyond, no Mask of the Phantasm, no Dark Knight, no Arkham games, no DCEU, and no Matt Reeves Batman. Every single Batman property of the modern age stands on the shoulders of this movie. This was the movie that let Batman shed the legacy of Adam West and bring us a movie lifted straight from the pages of a comic book. Tim Burton's style put the goth back into Gotham City and made this movie look like nothing we had ever seen. And it gave the world Jack Nicholson's Joker, to this day one of cinema's greatest villains. But to be completely honest with you, even though I have ranked Batman 1989 above them, I actually prefer watching the other green tier films to this one. I kind of agree with High Top Films that this is not a very good Batman movie. Michael Keaton is great in the role, but the role as it was written doesn't really give him a whole lot to work with. Bruce doesn't really have an arc in this movie, he's just Batman, and even then he's not one that's very faithful to the comics. The only real motivation we ever see from him comes in the third act when he learns that the Joker was the one who killed his parents. But all that does is completely undermine the dynamic between Batman and the Joker by making it all about revenge, not justice. So why did I give it such a high ranking? Well, like I said before, it's not because of the quality of the movie itself, but because of its legacy. This movie completely changed what was possible for superhero movies, and it paved the way for every other Batman property since. But more than that, this movie directly led to the creation of not one, but 2 other movies that have had a huge influence over who I am as a person. Because without Batman 1989, there would be no Spider-Man. Batman built a franchise that made Warner Brothers over $1 billion in 9 years, and made Columbia Pictures decided they wanted a piece of this superhero action. So they acquired the rights to Spider-Man and made this. The success of the franchise that Tim Burton launched with Batman in 1989 led to us getting some of the best superhero movies ever made. But it didn't just give us Spider-Man, because through a quirk of history, Columbia Pictures held the rights to the novel of Casino Royale, the only Ian Fleming James Bond novel not adapted to screen. So in order to get the rights to Spider-Man off MGM, they swapped them for Casino Royale. This allowed Eon Productions to do a soft reboot of James Bond in 2006 with Daniel Craig in arguably the best James Bond movie ever made. These 2 movies are part of the reason I love movies, and both of them can trace their origins directly back to the success and legacy of Batman 1989, just like every other Batman movie, game, or TV show of the last 30 years. That is why I have placed this movie at the top of the green tier. Which means we are now in the blue tier, the god tier of Batman movies, and we start with number 2, Batman Forever. I know this is probably going to be the most controversial entry in this ranking, but I just unashamedly love this film. Any good Batman movie is defined by its villains, and the combination of Jim Carrey's Riddler and Tommy Lee Jones's Two-Face is just perfection. They dominated the movie, and despite the actors not liking each other on set, they still delivered one of the most entertaining villain team-ups of all time. This movie takes the comic book inspired production design from the Burton films but injects some colour and energy and humour into the mix with so much style and movement in every frame that you just can't help but be swept up in how fun it all is. Director Joel Schumacher went too far with this in Batman and Robin, but for me, his first Batman entry found the perfect balance. It is hands down the best looking Batman movie, at least it was until last week. I mean, look at this movie. Why don't all superhero movies end with the characters running at the camera in silhouette just because it looks cool? Of course, a lot of people don't really like this movie, and to be honest, I can see where they're coming from. It's pretty weird, especially at the start, and Jim Carrey is always a polarizing actor. I also don't think Val Kilmer gave a particularly memorable performance as Batman, even though, unlike Michael Keaton, he had a script to work with that gave him a genuine character, motivation, and story arc that culminates in this.
I'm both Bruce Wayne and Batman, not because I have to be. Now, because I choose to be.
But regardless, I understand why a lot of people find it just too weird or too lighthearted to feel like a proper Batman movie. But that's kind of why I love it, and this is why I placed it above all those other movies. Because a movie like, say, Batman Begins does everything it sets out to do and does it perfectly. But if I want to watch a gritty and grounded Batman story, I'll choose The Dark Knight over Begins every time. But sometimes I just want to have a great time, and Batman Forever delivers on that front every time in a way that, in my opinion, no other Batman movie does. And that is why it gets a place on the God tier. And finally, number 1 is of course The Dark Knight. This won't come as a surprise at all, but this movie is something more than a movie. It became something else entirely.
Legend, Mr. Wayne.
The Dark Knight didn't just change comic book movies. It changed cinema. This was the movie that firmly established superhero movies as legitimate works of art, and alongside the Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, helped cement the genre as the most dominant force at the box office in the 21st century. And to this day, this is the standard to which all other superhero movies are compared. Every element of the filmmaking is as good as it ever gets with blockbusters. Nolan made full use of IMAX cameras for the first time to convey the scope of the story. A rigorous commitment to practical effects further grounded the realism and tangibility of this world. A realism that was backed up by a focused and tightly written script that placed Bruce's struggle and character right at the heart of the story. He was then set across from Heath Ledger's Joker, the perfect character to probe these themes and character flaws in a way that gave us what is quite simply the most iconic cinematic villain since Darth Vader. All of these elements, along with an outstanding supporting cast, I think these two are still the best Jim Gordon and Alfred we've had on screen, come together under the direction of Christopher Nolan at the height of his career to give us quite simply the best Batman movie, the best sequel, hell, one of the best movies ever made. Which brings us at last to The Batman, and spoilers from here on in. Like I said at the start of the video, I won't be giving it a number just yet. As you have seen, a lot of my rankings have been a mix of how much I like the film and the film's legacy. We'll have to wait and see what The Batman's legacy will be, but I feel pretty confident right now placing it firmly in the God tier. This movie is simply an incredible achievement. I loved it. I loved the use of voiceover from Batman as Gotham City unfolded in front of us like the pages of a comic book. I loved every frame of the movie with its contrast between dark and light. I loved the score. I loved how it was free from the continuity shackles of a cinematic universe. I loved how we finally saw Batman being a detective. I loved how they incorporated horror elements to show us just how much terror Batman strikes into the hearts of his victims. I loved that Batman was so silent. I loved the return of Gothic architecture to Wayne Manor and how much Gotham City looked like a precursor to LA and Blade Runner. I loved how it was raining all the time, and I loved the sound of the goddamn Batmobile. And most importantly, I loved getting another fresh interpretation of the characters we have seen on screen for decades. I loved Jeffrey Wright's Jim Gordon, and loved how he had so much to do in this movie as Batman's ally that he might as well have been Robin. I love how Zoe Kravitz gave us the most grounded Catwoman we've seen on screen. I love how Colin Farrell disappeared into the role of the Penguin, and I especially loved the moment when his legs were tied up and he waddled after Jim and Batman. And finally, I loved how the Batman gave us a young, angry and traumatized Bruce Wayne. He's not the cool, suave billionaire we're used to seeing. He's a broken man looking for meaning and purpose. Batman is not a hero in this movie, he's a vigilante out for vengeance, and that he used Paul Dano's Riddler to challenge the very foundation of Batman's identity and purpose, to make Bruce question what his vigilantism and fight against corruption means when he is confronted by someone like the Riddler with the exact same mission. Then, as the cherry on the cake, the story focuses on the corruption and lies at the heart of Gotham's elite and turns it on the angel of the Batman universe, Thomas Wayne. This was a story where we see Bruce realize that neglecting the Wayne family legacy and channeling his anger into the Batman fueled the very thing he set out to fight. And this was the story that made Bruce realize what the Batman is, that he had to become more than a vigilante, more than vengeance. He had to become a hero. Oh, and this movie did all of this for less than half of what The Dark Knight cost. So yeah, this goes in the god tier for sure. It could well be the best Batman movie, but I think it's too early to make that call. It's not perfect. I mean, the main flaw for me was the romance between Selina and Bruce, even though her whole character's motivation was supposed to be her avenging her girlfriend that she is still in love with. I found that hard to buy when she's off kissing Batman a couple of days later. I mean, don't get me wrong, I really liked Zoe Kravitz in the role, I just think the romance undermined her character. Also, and I'm going to get a lot of comments about this, but I don't think we needed the Joker cameo. I mean, sure, it was kind of cool in the moment, but I think it was unnecessary to tease a sequel and it broke up the flow of the ending. But right now, those are really my only nitpicks with the movie, but I'll need to rewatch it again a few times and let it settle among all the others before deciding where to place it in the ranking. Like I said at the start of the video, I have had years to think about these movies and they both hold very special places in my heart. So I don't want to go making some grand proclamations about the Batman while I'm still high on the hype of the first viewing. It's easy to go chasing after the new shiny thing because the last new and shiny thing is 14 years old now and you're getting a bit tired of it, even though it was your favorite for a very long time. But goddamn, this is a great movie and I cannot wait to see it again. But I want to know what you think, so let me know down below what your Batman rankings are. These movies are all so different from each other and I am really keen to see which movies you would place in each tier. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and find me on Twitter if that's your thing, and otherwise I'll see you soon. Same bat time, same bat channel.